Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amount given in the link in the description box. But the least you could do is to watch this show, like, share, and comment. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest tonight, Professor Mohammad Marandi. Professor Marandi is an Iranian scholar and he teaches at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a great pleasure.
I wanted to discuss the recent news about the new ceasefire plan on Gaza. This was announced by Donald Trump, but various media and parties involved have confirmed this. What is your first impression about the new ceasefire plan? Of course, people on ground, including Palestinian groups, have welcomed this, given they see that less or fewer bombs would be dropping now, but they have also warned and asked people to keep their guardrails up, given the tradition of Israeli deception and disobeying of ceasefire in the past. What's your first impression of the ceasefire?
First, I think the most important issue is that this is reflective of a failure by the Israeli regime over the past 2 years on all fronts, except for in Syria, where Netanyahu colluded with the United States and Erdogan and Qatar. But other than that, they failed in Lebanon. They failed to dismantle the resistance there. They failed to dismantle the resistance in Yemen, despite the United States getting involved in the war. They failed against Iran, obviously, and they've failed in Gaza despite this Holocaust. They wanted to colonize it. They wanted to ethnically cleanse the land. They wanted to dismantle the resistance, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and their allies. And they failed on all accounts. So this is a defeat for the Israeli regime. Now, I've seen online some people express disappointment in the results that we've seen until now. I think that their expectations are unrealistic. In wars of liberation, if we look through history, and you are, of course, a person well versed in history, liberation does not happen overnight. And there are no stunning victories over an overwhelming force that has been policing and subjugating a population for decades and, in many cases, centuries across the world. We saw in Algeria, we saw in your own country, in the subcontinent, in the broader sense, and elsewhere, that how the price for liberation is always heavy. And there is no way to gain liberation except for putting a form of pressure on the oppressor that is, in the long run, not tolerable. And I think it's quite clear that this is an important chapter. Just as the defeat of Israel in 2000 against and its forced withdrawal from Lebanon was a chapter, just as its defeat in its war with Hezbollah 5, 6 years later was another chapter. Its defeat against the resistance in Gaza on multiple occasions over the last couple of decades, each has been an important chapter, because we have to remember that this current Holocaust that's been going on for over 2 years, this is not the first time that Gaza has been attacked. This is just the worst case yet. Otherwise, genocidal attacks were carried out over the years. This territory has been surrounded. They've prevented food from getting in. They prevented people from having electricity. This has been going on for many, many years. And of course, the very existence of Gaza in its current form is because Palestinians were expelled from their land, and many of them are refugees in Gaza. So um, taking that into account, I consider this to be a major victory. But does that mean that it's going to last? That's unclear. A lot depends on Trump because for the Israeli regime to withdraw completely and for the ceasefire to move on to a new stage, that will depend on Trump. Now, of course, no one trusts Trump, and Trump is genocidal. Trump has been a part of this Holocaust. He's very evil. He even in his language, he's spoken in genocidal terms many times before, not just against the people of Gaza. Remember, he's effectively said, if you don't accept my ceasefire, he said this on numerous occasions, that I will destroy you. In other words, he intensified the Holocaust. Or, for example, in the war against Iran, he told people of Tehran to leave the city, like a city of 10, 15 million, depending on how you calculate it. He told these are all, this is the language of a criminal. Uh, but the point is that uh, Trump needs this ceasefire too. Forget the fact that he wants this. Uh, what is it called? The Nobel Peace Prize, a worthless prize that's never had any credibility and has regularly been given to either Western proxies or war criminals, and it's just a means for Western soft power to expand its influence, just like the Nobel Prize for Literature. That's for the most part, that's true about that as well. But in any case, and even the other prizes, there's it's very Western Eurocentric and centered on Western scholars and not beyond the West or China, or for example. But in any case, I digress. He wants this desperately, but more importantly, the United States has lost its credibility, and we've been discussing this together for quite a while now. It's lost its credibility because it's failed in Ukraine. It's lost its credibility because of the failure in the trade wars, the tariff wars. It's lost its credibility across the global south. More recently, we have to include India and Brazil, for example, two major powers, two major global powers. And of course, it's lost its credibility in West Asia because the entire world sees the United States and the collective West, and of course, those countries in this region that refuse to marginalize the Israeli regime, like Erdogan, the regime in Ankara, Qatar, Egypt, Emirates, and Jordan, and so on. So, but they've lost their credibility, and if he does not force Netanyahu to accept his plan, what has been agreed upon, then he is a major loser. Then he has no more credibility. Then the world sees him as subordinate to Netanyahu, which we've been saying is the case. I mean, I've never believed that he is subordinate to Netanyahu as an individual, but I've always believed that he was subordinate to the Zionist lobby that stood behind Netanyahu. So here, Trump has to make a decision. If Netanyahu refuses to carry out uh, the obligations that the Zionist regime needs to carry out, then if he refuses to do so, then Trump has no credibility and is shown as weak. And that strengthens the hand of the Palestinians and the resistance, and it weakens the United States globally. And also, but the question is, where do Zionists in the United States stand? Because I personally believe that the true power does not lie in Israel, and it does not lie in Washington. It lies in Zionism, the Zionists, the wealthy and powerful and influential ethno-supremacist criminals that have been uh, carrying out this genocide and ethnic cleansing and supporting it. Have they come to the conclusion that the Israeli regime is destroying itself? Because it is. The world despises it. That, I think, is the number one result of all of these wars and the 2 years of genocide. that the world now despises the Israeli regime. And even in the United States, we see that the divide is that the opposition is growing, even among the right. We see Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and others. And the issue of um, Charlie Kirk, which and from the beginning it was sheer speculation at the beginning, but now the circumstantial evidence is growing that this has something to do with the Israeli regime. So things are not going well for the Zionists, and it's probably in their interest too to put a muzzle on Netanyahu or to remove him. But we'll see. I mean, it's in their interest, but they're not necessarily uh, reasonable or logical because they're genocidal. So I think that in general, this is good. Obviously, the resistance didn't get everything it wants. That's not how it is in the real world. But I think that they negotiated well. This, I think, is a dark chapter for Turkey, or the regime in Turkey, and in Qatar, and and all those who put pressure on Hamas and the resistance over the past few days to accept terms, the terms of Trump. But the negotiators worked very hard. We had a coalition of negotiators from the different resistance groups working together. And I think that despite the pressure of these regional regimes that are allies and proxies of the West, and of course that they don't reflect public opinion. I mean, let's be clear, whether in Turkey or Turkey or in Jordan or in Egypt or anywhere else in the region and beyond now, people are with the Palestinians. There's no doubt about that. We're talking about these regimes that are bound to the West. So I think they were able to get good concessions. The weakness, as I said earlier, is that Trump will have a key role to play. But as I said, if Trump does not do so, if he does not force the Israelis to do what they're supposed to do, it's not going to look good for him at all. And one final point, and that is that some speak about uh, the prisoners. That Hamas and Islamic Jihad are giving up their prisoners and they no longer have leverage. There are two things here. One is that this whole chapter is a reminder to all of us how racist the West is. Because during the last 24 hours, all the talk in Western media has been about the Israeli hostages, a handful of people who are mostly soldiers, and in reality, they're all soldiers because the Israelis claim that their whole population is the military. So they're POWs. But they don't talk about the thousands of Palestinians, and they haven't been talking about the thousands of Palestinians, which include women and children, that are being held hostage by the regime. And that shows how sinister the West is, how sinister Western journalists are, Western media is, and Western politicians and diplomats are. Whether they are serving in India or in Iran or in Europe or in North America, they are representing regimes and that are promoting this institutional racism. Their media is, whether they're working in Latin America, the journalists, their institutions, their colleagues are promoting racism through these narratives. So that I think is important for us to remember where the West stands and what the collective West is. And again, I'm not talking about the populations because we see huge numbers of people across the West, Italy, Spain, Australia, and elsewhere coming to the streets across the Western world in support of the Palestinian people. But the second point is that these prisoners, these Israeli prisoners, they will be used to get the Palestinian prisoners released. And most of them will be released. Some, unfortunately, will continue to be held, but most will be released. And secondly, if people are worried about a renewed attack, we've already seen that the Israeli regime does not care about its prisoners in Gaza. It has been killing them throughout the last 2 years. That is not the sort of leverage that is going to stop a renewal of the Holocaust. But what will be able to make the renewal of the Holocaust more difficult is this period of time where the resistance will be able to strengthen its infrastructure, strengthen its, expand its tunnels, bring in new weapons, and prepare itself for a potential next phase. So on the whole, I think this is very positive, and I think we should be very happy uh, as we see the scenes of children celebrating in Gaza, the survivors of this Holocaust, dancing and jumping up and down in joy.
A lot of points on the ceasefire is built on the original 20-point Trump plan that was offered, from which Hamas selectively agreed on a specific set of points, which includes, of course, cessation of hostility in return of exchanges of prisoners of wars and captives, allowing of humanitarian aid. But you mentioned about how the resistance can regroup in the process of implementation of the first phase, and then and the rest of the phases, which also includes the evacuation of Israeli forces from Gaza. Again, in a planned phase, there are these different lines that are drawn, but it must be said that the Israeli force has made it very clear that they intend to keep a buffer zone within the borders of Gaza that would also include the crossings in Rafah with Egypt. But my question to you, Professor Marandi, is that if we look at the original 20-point plan, it is very categorical about quote unquote demilitarization of Gaza and the total surrender of the resistance in Gaza, which include Hamas, but also others. Now, Hamas has, of course, rejected this, but Qatar and others that are involved in these negotiations have been hell bent on this point. Um, uh, how do you look at the future of the impact of this ceasefire on the long-term prospect of resistance in Gaza itself?
Well, I think we've discussed this once before, and I think that this whole 2 years has had multiple benefits. But I mean, the genocide assault and the fact that every day we've been viewing very dark images that are really painful, and sometimes it really makes one's day quite dark. On some days, the whole, your whole day is darkened by some of the images. But that aside, I think there have been multiple benefits. And as I said, as I've already said, the West has exposed itself. The Zionist regime, first and foremost, has exposed itself as genocidal and illegitimate in the eyes of the world and the youth in the West. But also, I think that people's eyes are much more open about who the true friends of the Palestinian people really are. And I think the hypocrites have been exposed. Qatar has, over the last 2 years, has shown itself to be simply a proxy of the United States. And that is good. That is a good thing. That helps. Because if people do not know where everyone stands, then people are going to be more easily fooled into taking the wrong course of action. I think the same is true about Erdogan. I think it's also true about the Emirates and all of these regimes that continue to do trade and business for these last 2 years, that refuse to break off political ties, that have military cooperation behind the scenes, that export oil or transport oil or import gas. All of these have been exposed. And at the negotiating table, we know that these regimes have been putting pressure on the resistance. Now, the resistance can't speak out against them. Just like in the Hamas statement, they thanked, they acknowledged Trump's role in all this, but that doesn't mean they like Trump. They know that Trump is an evil monster, just as evil as Netanyahu. But that they are negotiating, and they have to do it in a way for it to work. So and they also you know It's a complicated situation in the region. But I think that everyone now, if people's eyes have been opened to the reality of Gaza, to the reality of who its supporters are, to the reality of what governments are really doing and what they pretend to do. And of course, Syria is a chap is because one of the things that we've seen in the past is that the West, through its regional proxies, oil and gas rich proxies, including Qatar in particular, in recent years, Qatar, they've been using sectarianism, racial hatred, and in order to create religious hatred, in order to create division, to preserve this, their hegemony. It's divide and rule, and of course, these regimes have all sorts of media outlets. It's not just Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, or anything like that. Or these key major. They have thousands of websites and thousands of centers, religious or cultural or whatever one would like to call them across the world. And they have a huge network with that are heavily funded. And they have basically been trying to use sectarianism within the context of Western interests. And so they helped NATO and the Israeli regime destroy Syria, and they used sectarianism to have people blame the resistance and create hostility towards the axis of resistance. But ultimately, after what we've seen over the last 2 years, except for those who are deeply sectarian and are just obsessed with their disinformation and misinformation, except for them, everyone's eyes are now open. I think the world, the region, and the world sees where the problem lies. The problem lies with Western hegemony. It lies with the empire. And everyone now sees who are the tools of that empire, which entities are working with the empire. And it also sees how unreliable the empire is, where it allows its own proxies to be bombed. So I think this is all good. I think this is all positive. But does that mean that things are going to be easy in the days and weeks and months ahead? No. Does that mean that the Israeli regime is not going to carry out airstrikes and on Syria? No. Does that mean it will abide by its commitments to Gaza? No. Or will it stop the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, or will it refrain from starting another war with Iran? No, none of this is is for certain. In fact, I'm quite sure that the opposite is true. I do not believe that this regime has the ability to behave in a normal as normal countries do. It's just it's not capable. The nature of Zionism and ethno-supremacism makes it incapable of behaving normally. So um, I'm optimistic about the future. I think this was a major victory uh, for the resistance, but that doesn't mean that 2 weeks from now the ceasefire will not collapse.
Some analysts are saying that there is a greater likelihood this time of at least the ceasefire holding up, given Trump has put his own name into this set of negotiations. The earlier ceasefire was mostly building up on Biden-Harris administration's negotiators. That remains to be seen. I wanted to come to your earlier
Can
comment
I
about,
can I
yes,
just add a couple of things?
of course.
Trump is under a lot of pressure because inside the United States, people are turning against Israel in a very big way. And the Israeli regime and the Zionists in the United States are taking away civil liberties from ordinary people. They're taking away their ability to access information. And people are seeing this. And the outrage and anger is growing. And even though they're paying people to do propaganda, and paying a lot of money for people to put up posts supporting the Israeli regime, and despite the fact that they're shutting down social media and the mainstream media to any sympathetic voices to the Palestinian people, and despite the fact that so many people are being expelled from different universities in their place of work, but people are becoming even more angry. And we're now seeing, for example, how someone like Candace Owens, every time she speaks, she's getting millions of viewers, and then millions of and then and thousands of, not tens of thousands of people on influencers on social media are are uh, are pushing her narrative even further. Uh, so uh, this is not really. I mean, if the United States was smart, if Trump was, he's not smart, but if Trump was getting good advice, he need to put a stop to this for the sake of the United States, for the sake of the Israeli regime, for the sake of Zionism. They need a halt to this because things are going downhill very fast for the regime. So I agree that there is a chance, a hopefully a good chance that the ceasefire will hold because Trump A would like to have that what is it, the Nobel Peace Prize award, and B because ordinary Americans are not just outraged by the fact that they are deeply involved in the genocide, but they also see how the Israeli regime and Zionism is dictating terms to the way in which they conduct their own personal lives inside the United States.
I agree with the spirit of optimism to the extent that this reflects an enormous pressure from people, ordinary people in the imperial core itself about exposing their government's complicity in the genocide. And also people in Palestine themselves demonstrating to the world how resilient they are. But at the same time, I also see how uh, the plans are laid out. They are still talking about the Board of Peace, which should be overseen supposedly by President Trump of the United States and Tony Blair. I mean, this reminds me again, coming back to history of the mandate years after Treaty of Versailles, and then multiple phases that was overseen by the United States. Basically, it's more than 100-year occupation by the British and the American regimes. They are talking about the language that they are using. Um, uh, all of that reflects that the resistance has to continue to operate and expand. If you could, Professor Marandi, tell us a little bit about its implication on the larger region. We have seen that Ansar Allah in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Iran have had tremendous sacrifice for the cause. What would be their interpretation of the ceasefire, at least to the extent that the ceasefire holds? And would they come up emboldened and accelerate the next phase or path towards Palestinian freedom?
Yes, no doubt. They fully support the resistance. They fully support their position at the negotiating table. And you know that as well as I, that the negotiations aren't over. And the Palestinians will not accept Tony Blair. In fact, when I was in Sochi a couple of weeks ago, I don't know if you saw it, in my question to President Putin, I said that putting uh, uh, Blair's name forward is an insult to injury. This is one of the great criminals and murderers of our time. He was the person who lied in order to help pave the way for the rape and plunder and destruction of Iraq. Across the world, he's despised. Uh, and I think that's reflective of Trump. It doesn't help Trump to behave in such a um, discrim despicable manner by putting such people or attempting to put such people in a position of authority. But Hamas has said it's not going to accept some sort of any sort of colonial mandate. So I don't think that this peace process is going to, or this negotiated process for ceasefire is going to reach its final conclusion. At least in the way the Americans want it to take place. I don't see that happening at all. Hamas has already said it's not going to give up its arms. If it's not going to give up its arms, then that automatically means that it's not going to, no overlord such as Blair is going to be able to govern over uh, the people of Gaza. So, this is the first phase. What is important right now is for Palestinian children to get food. It is for them to get infant formula, which the Israeli regimes have been desperately trying to prevent them from obtaining, for them to have some sense of normality, for some rebuilding to begin, but also for the resistance to prepare itself for the future. And the axis of resistance is doing that across the board. And again, I have to stress that liberation does not happen overnight. And I think that the last 2 years has significantly weakened the West. And remember, if Trump, I said this earlier, if Trump does not abide by his commitments, it has broader implications for the United States. This is not this is not 2 years ago. The world has changed. Gaza is a global issue now, and people are disgusted about the role that the United States, the regime in Washington, has played. So if he does something stupid, if he is foolish, the world will be outraged because no one wants to see this genocide restart. So he is under pressure. Alongside the other issues that we've discussed together, this is a key issue. But I think right now the important thing is for Palestinians to recover a bit. But also, this is going to cause huge tensions among Zionists and in occupied Palestine. This is going to be very controversial. And we already know how deeply divided the regime is. Not because one faction is against genocide. No, Zionists in Palestine, according to their own polls, are overwhelmingly supportive of genocide. They are it's a truly evil society. And fortunately, many young Jews across the Western world have been outraged and they've been at the forefront of the resistance to show clearly to us all that Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism, just as Christian Zionism has nothing to do with Christianity. But I think that while the United States is in uh, it's in a very difficult position, and while the Israeli regime is deeply divided now, and the resistance will have time to strengthen itself and to rearm and to give bring some aid to the people of Gaza. We should continue as civil society, as activists across the globe, to keep the pressure up, to keep waking people up. Those who still remain asleep or those who are half awake, they have to be awakened. Those who are awake have to remain awake. And those who are active have to become more active because we cannot become complacent. We cannot move on and say, well, the problem is solved. No, the problem is not solved. This was a Holocaust. This was the greatest crime of our time. It was probably, in some ways, it is a unique crime in human history because they carried it out in front of our eyes for 2 years, shamelessly, in the Western media justified it or was apologetic for the regime for over 2 years. We have no right to be complacent.
And Professor Marandi, if you could tell us a little bit about your sense of this on the Arab world itself. Among all the pressures on Trump, uh, one thing that is being talked about is that even the reactionary Arab states have had to apply pressure on Trump because apparently there is a huge gulf between their citizens and the ruling elites in the Arab world. Now, we know that there has been a long history of the centrality of the Palestinian struggle for freedom and independence within Arab nationalism. And as bit by bit the Arab nationalism gave up the Palestinian cause, starting with Camp David, they acceded piece by piece to the American imperialist and Zionist group. Arab nationalism became more and more reactionary when it comes to the Palestinian cause, but also larger causes within the region. Now, one thing that this genocide did was to at least not put a lid, but at least question that trajectory. In fact, one of the stated goals of the Hamas attack on October 7 was to stall the Abraham Accord-like reactionary coalition within the region. Now, it would be very hard for many of these states to go back immediately to that kind of alliance, even though it must be said that it would be it's been a dark history for many of these states, the way they have spoken about Hamas, the way they have participated in talks about demilitarizing Hamas, etc., etc. But your sense of the larger impact of this on Arab nationalism, to the extent that word itself is meaningful.
Well, I'm not sure how much Arab nationalism will play a role, but I think that something much more important is uh, has been achieved, and that is that this sense of humanity and resistance uh, has grown across the region and across the world towards the Palestinian cause. And regimes that are bound to the West, whether NATO regimes or oil and gas rich dictatorships, their position has been weakened. And the people over the past 2 years, their position is very clear. And this is as the Western Empire declines, these regimes that are bound to the West are going to be more vulnerable to their people. I think that things are shifting much faster than we think. When we look at the divisions inside the United States, and Tucker Carlson just hours ago, I haven't been able to watch what he said, but he was speaking about civil war. Now, my views on immigration and on the on what goes on in the United States aside, I have my own views. The United States, those people those many millions of people who go to Europe and the United States are there basically because the United States and the Europeans have destroyed so much of the rest of the world. The Americans have destroyed so much of Latin America through their dirty wars, and the Americans and the Europeans have destroyed so much of West Asia, North Africa, and of course the general plunder of the global South Africa and Latin America and Asia by the empire over centuries have led to this. Otherwise, Indians would like to be near their parents, Iranians or Iraqis or Brazilians or Bolivians or any people, Mexicans. I think most people, but I think it's fair to say that Nigerians or South Africans would prefer living in their own towns or in their own country where they can see friends and relatives rather than moving across land and experiencing danger and dying many on the way to get to somewhere safer than where they are because of the sanctions and death and destruction in the history of empire. But in any case, the divisions in the United States are extraordinary, and the decline of the economy is clear as day. And people are forecasting greater difficulties, and of course, Europe, through its stupidity and the proxy war against Russia, is also rapidly declining. Their proxies across the world are going to feel that they're more vulnerable as the West declines. And so it's going to be more challenging, especially after what happened in the last 2 years and how they've all been complicit, whether it's the Qatar that pretended to support the Palestinians or the Emirates, which never supported the Palestinians. it really doesn't make a difference. We are going to be living a different future. And again, we should not be looking at things within like a weeks and months. A liberation, that's not how historically liberation takes place. But I think that ultimately the issue of Palestinian liberation is also linked to the issue of wider liberation across our region.
I know we are over time, but just a closing comment for you. If you could tell us about the role of media. I'm talking about progressive media who have stood for the cause or stood side by side with the Palestinian solidarity cause. Many ordinary individuals who many of whom I know personally hitherto didn't know anything about history of Palestine have recognized this genocide for what it has been. But as you said, that there are still many people who are half awake. We need to wake them up. Uh, your thoughts about our role, the role of not as much organizers because they are generally more passionate and committed, but media who tends to pick up things that are generally more trendy, and also people at large who are already so fatigued with their own life. There is a danger of celebrating this and then going back to our own dungeons. So your final word on our role going forward, since you said that this resistance is going to be a long process as empire doesn't fall apart within a couple of days or weeks.
This is no longer just the axis of resistance or the resistance in Palestine. This is a global resistance, and alternative media has played an enormous role because of their dedication. They are a key part of the resistance, whether it's yourself and your colleagues or others that are being have been active over the past couple of years in particular. Their role has been of extraordinary importance. And of course, the activists who go to the streets. I on your show and on a couple of other shows, I've mentioned this that I remember early on in the genocide, there was a picture of some lone woman in front of the Israeli embassy, the Israeli regime's embassy in South Korea, but we've gone a long way from there. And all these people who've been active from the very beginning or earlier, it is, they've helped create and strengthen this resistance. And that is why the West and the United States in particular are trying to shut down social media. That is why social media itself is so biased. But the problem they have is that the people have so many people have woken up, and it's hard to justify the intentional massacre of children. It's hard to justify unplugging um, in hospitals, going to incubators and unplugging those incubators and intentionally letting those infants die. It's hard justifying the uh, the bombing, regular bombing of hospitals, the slaughter of families in tents, burning people alive. It's hard to justify the fact that after a ceasefire that the Israeli regime requested, they continue to bomb Lebanon and they murder whole families, some of them American citizens. Just recently, they murdered a Lebanese American family near the border uh, between Palestine and Lebanon, slaughtering three of the children, American-born citizens, and the father, another American citizen, complete indifference from the United States and the West. It's hard to justify all these crimes, the bombing of Yemen, and the complicity of these countries, those countries that do trade and business, those countries who have American bases, where those bases were used to help the Israeli regime or the American regime, whether against Iran or Yemen or Syria or elsewhere. It's We live in a totally different world today because there were people who spoke up, who risked their, I'm sure I think you recall about a year ago, maybe, I don't know exactly, but they started taking down a lot of these YouTube channels. And one of the YouTube channels was taken down immediately after one of my interviews. And that interview went uh, pretty viral. And then that woman lost her channel. And then, it's a long story, but uh, some of these were returned, but they're all suppressed. Yours is suppressed too. I've no doubt the algorithms do not work in your favor. But the dedication and the willingness for these people to lose their channels, and yourself included, and the fact that the enemy is so evil, carrying out these evil deeds, and no matter how much they suppress, and no matter how much they control mainstream media, with the hard work of activists, whether in alternative media or on the streets, they failed, and they're only exposing themselves further. And as I said earlier, the American people are now seeing how Israelis and Zionists are dictating terms to ordinary Americans, telling them what they can say and cannot say, what they can see and they cannot see. That is showing the ordinary Americans that some tiny regime far, far away is able to dictate terms and determine how they conduct their personal lives.
We'll leave it there. Like you, I'm hopeful that the ceasefire holds up, but I would also see it as a new phase of global resistance, as you said, that needs to be carried on because a lot is still due insofar as freedom for Palestinians are concerned. Professor Marandi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and hopefully we'll be seeing better days.
Thank you. Take care.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.